Please be seated. Back in the early 1800s, there were a group of miners living near in the Rockies. They found a real stash of silver or gold. They'd got so much silver and gold that they couldn't take it all. And so they decided to bury it, a lot of it, that which they could not take home. And they would come back and get it later. There was agreements made on how that was to be done. But one by one, the people who had stashed that treasure died. And all that was left was a man by the name of Thomas Beale. And he was starting to fear that his treasure would be lost forever. And so he wrote a description of where it was. The only problem is he wrote it in code. And when people tried to figure out what this code meant, nobody could decipher the code. And so over the years, there have been a lot of people trying to find this stash. They don't know exactly if it does exist because that might be a legend. But they keep looking for it in the hopes that somehow or other they will stumble upon a treasure that will change their lives forever. And that's not the only one. In 1988, there was a man by the name of Forrest Finn who got a diagnosis that he had cancer and that he would not live long. He decided he had a treasure and he would like to put it someplace, but he left a poem describing where he had left the treasure. Now this is 1988. This is getting up closer to our time. And when he died, they saw the poem and they tried to and they couldn't make heads or tails out of it. And so a lot of people heard about this, and by 2019, over 65 or 70,000 people had gone looking for that particular treasure and not found it. Once again, not knowing exactly if it was there, but they were looking for it. They're looking for something that would change their lives forever. This becomes kind of a metaphor for the way people live lives. People searching for some kind of meaning, some kind of significance, and some kind of treasure, whatever it might be, that will change their life, not knowing really whether it exists or not, but hoping that something happens. There's another incident that I found interesting in compliance with today's text, and that was the retirement of Tom Brady. Tom Brady was one of the best quarterbacks of all time, setting all kinds of records for the New England Patriots. More Super Bowl rings than anybody else in history. When he got near the end of his career, his wife was begging him to stop. Spend a little more time with family. Spend a little time with your child. And you're getting too old. 42 doesn't seem old to me now. Might be old to a few of you, but it doesn't seem very old. But she was worried about whether he'd be injured again. This time, in some way, that would be tragic, that would affect their life together in the future. It is said that when after the last Super Bowl, that he was walking with his wife and praying, and he was taking in all this adulation and was so excited about it. And news people had asked him again, once again, "Are you going to take another year?" And he said, "Well, I'll give it some consideration." They had all expected him to retire. He said, "Let me give it some consideration." And it is said that they were walking down, and he was basking in his glory. His wife turned to him and said, "Tom, when is it going to be enough? When is it going to be enough for you?" She felt that there were much more important things than football. They certainly didn't have to worry about their finances for the future, but she was concerned. And she was wondering why this was such an idol in his life. Could not give it up, even at great risk to himself and family. When is it going to be enough? In our gospel text today, this is one of the texts that is very familiar to you, but it usually is familiar in terms of a funeral sermon. But it's a dramatic text and recorded in John. And this is the revelation where Christ tells his apostles that he is in the Father, that he and the Father of the same substance, that he is in the Father and the Father is in him. He's basically saying, I am a part of God. We have interesting responses. He said, because he was worried about his apostles, this is the day before the Last Supper. And he's concerned about the apostles. He doesn't know if they really understand his mission yet. And he doesn't think that they understand who he is. And he says, I'm going to be going away. He's talking about his ascension. Then he's kind of wondering what will happen to them. But he starts out by saying, I'm going to prepare a place for you. That where I am, I guess talking through eternity, where I am, you will be also. And you know the way. And Thomas says, how do we know the way? We don't understand what you're saying. And he said, I am the way, and the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And Philip says, and listen to this, Philip says, show us God, show us the Father, and that will be enough. That'll be enough. Basically, Philip is saying, really? Is there really a God? You're tied in some way, you're saying you're God? And he show us God. And Jesus really says, you're looking at him. Wow. And of course, Thomas and Philip don't quite get it here. They'll learn later, after the resurrection, after the Spirit comes upon them. They'll understand it, not now. You ever think so much of history is driven by discontent, the quest for more power, security, money? It's an idolatry that stems from the fact that we think we can gain happiness and some kind of significance on our own and not on the achievements that we make because of Christ, or the mission that we have in Christ, or the witness that we make to Christ. If it were possible to find significance and happiness in ourselves, by ourselves, why would nobody seem to get it? All looking for something more, just a little more. We're all tied in with the title of the book of my friend Tim Anderson, who wrote a book called Just a Little More, talking about what drives us most is just trying to get more of what we think will make us happy or will give us some sense of safety, some sense of worth. Philip said, show us God, and it'll be enough. Let's assume that there is no God, because Philip is kind of making that kind of message. But let's think, if there's no God, what does life mean? What significance does it have? If we are just a bunch of cells and protoplasm, what are we here for? What are we doing? Then you have to understand that you have to come up with a purpose yourself, or a purpose that the community or society in general gives you. You have to make up a purpose or be content that you don't have one. And how empty does that leave us when we don't think we have a purpose? And how do people respond to this? by looking for more, seeking control, being the best, reaching out for anything that seems to give us some kind of significance in life. Philip would ask, does God exist? And Jesus said, you're looking at him. He said, first of all, I became a human being so that I would share in your life. I would understand you better. God is doing this. What an outrageous claim that is. He came to be a human so he could understand us. He would live with us. And we could feel we could communicate with him because he was a human. And he also made the sacrifice for us as a human being for our sin. Jesus came so he could walk beside us and understand our lives, to make atonement for our sin. He will be our hope. When I was in Hawaii, we did a play called Children of a Lesser God. And part of that is play is the fact that the people are deaf. Call it hearing impaired. When I talked to one of the officials of the deaf community, he said, no, we're deaf, we can't hear. We're not hearing impaired, we're deaf. And there is a school in Washington, D.C. called the DEF, and that's a school that specializes in a school for the deaf. And one of the pushes had been for a long time that they wanted a president who was deaf. They said, what good does it do to have a president who only communicates through voice, and we have to have an interpreter? And so in 1988, finally, they hired a president of Gallaudet who signed. He spoke the word of the deaf. And in the first meeting with the student body, and the leaders of that student body, one of the students came out, the phone, the focus of the photographers went on him, and he was crying. And they asked him, why are you crying? And he said, well, finally we got a president that communicated with us directly. We didn't need an interpreter. And that's exactly what God did in Jesus. We finally got somebody that lived on our level, that was divine, that could understand us and communicate with us. You know, when faith doesn't become all we need? I was watching again this camp meeting group that meets on television, and they always have somebody that's talking about a passage in the Old Testament of a woman, a widow, or a single widow woman, and her son who were starving, and the prophet comes to the house and says, I'd like for you to make me a meal. And she says, like, all I got left is enough for my son and myself, and if we don't eat, we'll die. And the prophet says, well, if you give something to the Lord's anointed, you will never have to worry about eating again. And they use this text on and on, every program that they have. And it's always plant the seed, and then you will get a return. But nothing will happen unless you plant the seed. And the seed, in this case, last night, was $600. And what they said was, you plant the seed and the $600, and we can guarantee that one thing that will happen is that you will have a bright financial future. Your finances will change. Somehow your mortgage will be paid off. And if you have an illness, it'll be cured. And you have problems with your children, it'll be solved. Just plant the seed and trust God. That's a really good deal for $600, isn't it? Make you financially wealthy, all your diseases go away, and your children behave, or your parents or grandparents. It's kind of sad. And then I can see why people say, well, religion isn't enough, if that's what it's all about. But yesterday I got a long email from a friend of mine, suffered a lot of problems physically and with the family in general. And she said, so I'm reaching out, and she said, I've written this prayer. I feel down. I feel like things are just not going to go well for us. But I wrote this prayer. It goes like this. Lord, when suffering overwhelms me inside and out, help me remember that what seems hopeless to me is not hopeless to you. You give food for the hungry, set prisoners free. You open the eyes of the blind and lift up the brokenhearted. You cherish those who follow you and care for the orphans and widows. You protect strangers and unravel plans meant for evil. You do. You do. In every place where there's suffering, you are there, tending, healing, restoring. This is you are in the world, and this is who you are in my life. And whenever despair whispers, nothing changes, remind me of all the ways you're working. Let hope rise in me as I rest in your arms. She has found the risen, divine Christ. And for her, right now, that's enough. And I gotta say that I know that Jesus lives. I believe in the crucifixion and the resurrection. I know that he said he goes to prepare a place for me. And I know he will be with me today. I know all of that. And that's enough. Amen. Pulpit hymn, Oh Jesus, I